Welcome back, everyone, to The Tsunami is Coming, What Keeps Me Up at Night edition. I am thrilled to greet someone I've known for a little while now, but it doesn't make us any younger. My good friend, Charles-Henri Colombier, Director of Microeconomic Analysis and Forecasting at Rexecode Institute, based in Paris here. Charles-Henri, thank you so much for joining me.
Thanks a lot, Jeremy. Hi, everyone.
And, well, to you, like to all of my other guests, I ask you, Charles-Henri, what keeps you up at night?
So I actually work as an economist, and my job consists in trying to analyze and forecast the French and the global economy. And one thing I have to say that always puzzles me is how the impacts of a demographic change tend to be underestimated by analysts and decision makers. Why am I mentioning this? Maybe I can give you a couple examples and you see what I have in mind. First of all, of course, demographic change has a very strong impact in terms of growth. As economists, when we think about the long-term economy, we tend to use a production function, and the drivers are actually threefold: productivity, labor, and capital. And there are actually major changes in the L factor, the labor factor, that sometimes are not always really understood. I think one country that really illustrates this well is Germany. Take Germany. Germany today is a country where, if you compare the number of people who turn 65, i.e., tend to get to the retirement age, and people to turn 20, well, you see a gap of 400,000 people every single year. So, in other words, the working age population tends to be decreasing at a pretty fast rate. And in this context, it's actually very hard for a country in the situation of Germany to generate much GDP growth. And if you compare the GDP level of Germany today to its level pre-COVID in 2019, we only see a 0.5% cumulated growth. So it's close to nothing. I mean, Germans like to talk about schwarze Null in terms of deficit. Well, they've actually had schwarze Null in terms of growth.
That's an amazing point, Charles-Henri. What strikes me, and you kind of hinted to this, is demographics is kind of the poor variable in the sense of it doesn't get any attention. It's easy to talk about immigration. It's easy to talk about retirement age. It's easy to talk about economic growth. And demographics is related to all of these, and yet no one really talks about it. Did you ever reach the conclusion as to why it's so hard to push this forward as a variable?
Right. It's kind of a paradox because it's one of the things that are relatively easy to forecast. I mean, demographics are slow to change, and we sort of see where demographics are going within five to 10 years. And you're right. You feel like you need sort of an electric shock for people to actually start talking about it. In the case of France, we've had it recently. It just happened that the number of deaths, of yearly deaths, has become higher than the number of yearly births. And all of a sudden, we have this debate about demographics that we hardly ever discussed for many years. So no, I totally see your point. I mean, there's other areas where the impacts are strong. Take, for example, the labor market and unemployment. In a
Mhm.
way, one might wonder if we have not turned the page of this era of fear of mass and unemployment that was pretty much the main driver of French economic policy for the past 20 to 30 years. Take the notorious in French CICE, Crédit d'impôt, compétitivité, emploi, which was one of the key measures taken by François Hollande. It was
Maybe say a couple of words on what that was
Yeah,
for our
exactly.
non-French
Sure,
audience. Yeah.
sure. It was actually a measure that basically subsidized companies in return for decisions to employ people, and it was actually meant officially to boost the external competitiveness of companies by reducing the cost of employment. But in fact, its true target was actually to reduce the unemployment rate, because François Hollande had then promised to invert the curve of unemployment. And actually, one of the main beneficiaries of the measure in France was the La Poste, so the French postal service, which probably isn't the company that is most exposed to foreign competition.
Mm.
But yes, it's like this has been the key priority of economic policies in a country like France for 30 years. Now, probably mass unemployment, sorry, is over, and it doesn't seem that policies have totally integrated this new reality.
Looking forward, I mean, on the forecasting front, it seems that demographics is a boat that is very, very slow to move and maybe arguably very hard to influence. Are those two assumptions correct? And what does that tell you about the trend and where we might land in countries like France and Germany and Europe more broadly?
You're right. I mean, if you take, for example, the topic of fertility rates, many countries have tried to reboost their fertility rates over the past few years, and they can have some sort of impact, but it takes a very long time, and it's not a massive impact. So you're right. Now there are other areas of demographic policies where things can change much faster, and they include, of course, immigration policy just as the Trump administration has showed us over the past years. Here, you clearly see a shift that impacts the U.S. labor market very fast. Now, looking forward, I think it's quite predictable that if we exclude the effects of AI and other massive innovations, the world economy is probably in a direction of slowing growth, and hence we actually have sort of a battle between the downward impacts of demographics on world growth and the upward impacts of AI and robotics. And so what is going to shape the future economy is the respective forces that play. Which of the two is going to be the strongest? I mean, the debate is clearly still open. We tend to conclude that the orders of magnitude could not be very different between the downward impact of demographics and the upward impact of AI. But it's of course one of the key questions for the coming years.
Mm. Another hypothesis to test, and thank you for that, is about immigration. So you mentioned the Trump example. The Americans are about to vote in a few months. Obviously, there's a French election coming up, and that is likely to be quite important. Here's a hypothesis. It's immigration could have solved many of these problems if you look at it only through an economic prism. But we also know that it is politically harder and not as sustainable economically. So it kind of feels demographics and immigration are closely tied exactly in that way, that immigration could have been a solution, economically speaking, but politically it gets harder. Do you see any truth to that in your research or in your thinking?
No, I mean absolutely, and you even see some countries such as Georgia Meloni's Italy
Mm,
that actually have to sort of turn their minds on immigration policy because they're in such a dire situation from a demographic standpoint that they have to take on some degree of immigration or else the economy is in trouble. Now it also depends on the economic structures of different countries. If you are like France, a country that is a country with pay-as-you-go public pension system and mostly publicly funded health spending, well, the global demographic dynamics is probably even more important than in countries like the US, where things tend to be more private and on an individual basis with a capitalization pension system. So the economic structures actually determine to what extent countries can do without or have to cope with high immigration from a purely macroeconomic standpoint.
mm. And perhaps to finish with this Italian example, is it possible or is it credible to think of demographics ultimately as the law of gravity, meaning it's the ultimate law you cannot absolutely ignore as hard as you may try as a politician. You may defy financial markets, probably not forever. You may defy some economic laws, probably not forever, but there is one that will come and bite you in the back. It is demographics.
No, you're right. Demographics are something that you have to cope with and do with because you cannot influence it efficiently in the short run. One would argue that the sovereign bond interest rate is also a good one.
Hmm.
And I think it's true for the US. It's true for European countries. Which of the two is the strongest? I think it's probably a short run versus a medium to long run question, but yeah, it's definitely a key determinant, which I think is too often underlooked both by governments and companies. Yeah.
Yeah, the long-term law of gravity. Charles-Henri, I think we haven't exhausted any of these topics, so I hope you come again. But thank you so much for extreme clarity on an extremely difficult topic. Thank you very much.
Thanks a lot, Jeremy, and happy to come back at some later point. Bye.
See see you soon, everyone.